So what we wanted to do is really finish up the UV unwrapping on the rest of our ship, right? We kind of did the UV unwrapping on the body. What we wanted to do is we wanted to do UV unwrapping on the thrusters and the pipes, right? We want to do that stuff. So I wanted to show those a little bit today, of course, as well also. So in this case, I'm going to hide the ship, right? I'm going to go, in this case, I think I'm using an older model, but I can always do some review lecture for you guys on unwrapping the body later this week. We can save that one. Should work fine. But in this case, we're going to focus on the other objects, right? So I'm going to go to the ship and turn off the visibility in the outliner, right? So that way we can focus on our curves, right? And those should already be converted to mesh, which they are. You can always hit 3 just to double check, right? I do want these curves to be all connected. So remember, there are 2 separate objects here because I kind of made them separately. So remember, in 4 for object mode, I can click on those pipes. I can shift left click on those pipes, right? Because left click is always your selection, particularly if you're using industry compatible, which we are for our class. And of course, shift is generally, usually in just about all software that's 3D, is going to be your add selection, right? In Blender, it's often your shift, your deselect also, which is actually somewhat common in other software as well. So really, most of the time when you want to add or subtract selections, shift will do well for you. Occasionally, it is control. Like if you're using like the tweak tool and the circle select, control deselects for you. So usually shift and or control will give you shortcuts for your selection stuff. Remember, you only have to hold down shift when you're left clicking, right? Once you've selected it, you can let go of shift. Now in these cases, I want to combine these into one object. Right click, right? Remember, right click brings up our object context menu, right? Really, it brings up any context menu. In this case, it's for object mode because we're in object mode. You'll see one of the top tools is called join, right? Join. It's a couple down from shade smooth, shade flat, join. What it does is it takes these objects, makes them into one. And of course, I could go up here to the outliner and I could double click on that, double left click on the NURBS curve, call those pipes, right? Because you of course can name stuff in Blender's outliner. I'll save that. And now what I really want to do is I want to kind of do some UV unwrapping on stuff. Now, in this case, because I'm starting from scratch, I don't have a UV distortion texture on this. Also, probably not a bad idea to switch back from our matte cap shader. So remember, we have our shader types up here: wireframe, regular shaded, material preview, which is actually a good one to use for this. I know some of your computers, though, aren't having a hard time with the material preview with Eevee, at least for this. So if you need be, you can just kind of click on your white sphere, right? Go to the little V a couple over from it, and you can switch back to like Studio, but you can also tell it to use color texture, and that will actually show at least the color texture on your model, right? So if need be, and the third of these balls up here, material preview, is not working well for you, you can always just go back to the fully solid white ball, the second one right here. Right, they're right up here in this corner. See where my cursor's at? And of course, a few over from that's that little V that points down. And you can switch back to Studio. You can turn texture on. Now, in this case, I need to create a new material for these. So what we do is we go to the Property menu on the side right here, right? There's this Property menu on the side. It's actually the biggest part of the right side of our menu here, right? It's got our tool properties, our modifier properties, some rendering properties here, some kind of world scene properties. And of course, towards the bottom, we've got the kind of reddish colored things, the red ball and the red checkerboard. And these are related to materials and textures. The red ball, the one second from the bottom, is for materials, right? Now, we did see this on our last project, and we're going to see it plenty on this project, right? So I can go down here, and I can just click on the red ball. Now, I could always go to the white ball here, right? Because once I've clicked on this, we see kind of this right here. So it's that red ball down here, that red sphere. Brings up this stuff. Now, there is a white sphere that looks just like the red one. It's kind of got like a little checkerboard in it, except it's white. If you click on that, you can see any materials that you have created in the Blender scene and apply them. In this case, there's none. So I will have to click on New, right? This big bar right here, New. And that will create a default material called Material. Now, we could leave that name. We could rename it if we want to call this UV material, but I'll just leave it Material for now. But you can name it right there, of course. And now we have a material created that is assigned to this object. Only to this object right now. And there's a lot of material properties here. Now you'll notice that these can be controlled through just the material itself. You don't actually have to plug textures into this. So we can actually just move sliders around to do stuff. But we are going to do some texturing on these things, so we will plug some textures in. Now in this case, I'm putting the UV grid on so that I can check for distortion. Right? So I can check for distortion. So the very top, not the very top, but kind of once we get past kind of these right here, you'll see there's one called base color. And you see there's kind of like a white bar here. If you click on that white bar, you can actually pick a color. But you'll notice the base color section has a yellow dot. In fact, these all have dots. They're usually gray, sometimes yellow, sometimes kind of a purplish color. But base color, and we click on that yellow dot, right, that yellow dot. That brings this up, right, and this is good because we're going to see this a bunch when we do our texturing on this, right? So we are going to see more of this as we go on, so kind of take this as a great way to start that off, and we'll get to do more lecture on it later on when we do texturing. But I want to move to image texture, right? So there's kind of a column here called texture, and not quite halfway down is image texture, and that's what I want. I want image texture. And of course, we've already seen this because I did it in the first video for UVunwrap for this. Once you plug that in, you'll see right below base color now is this stuff. There's actually some new stuff here. Linear, flat, repeat. You'll see there's an option for new or open. There's even a little browser for textures, right? So if you have some other textures already in Blender, you can kind of click on this to find them. If you want to bring something in from outside of Blender, you can open it. In this case, I wanted to create a new one inside of Blender. So I click on New. And it brings this up. And I can call this UVs. And I'm going to make the texture resolution higher, so I'm going to do 2048. It should always be double, right? So if you want your resolution higher than 1024, double it, right? 2048. If you want it higher than that, double that. 2048. If you double that, it's 4096, right? Now, because you guys aren't necessarily working on the best devices or computers, 2048 will probably be fine. If you've got a more powerful device, you could try for 4096, but keep in mind that, you know, we don't have necessarily perfect computers in this class, right? We are high school. So just kind of bumping the resolution up a little bit. There is an area called generated type in this area. It says blank. We click on that so we can pick UV grid, right? We click on that so we can pick UV grid. Because that's what we want. We want a grid, a checkerboard grid, to kind of help us see our UV distortion. And then we hit OK. And you'll see that if you did kind of set your white ball, then go to the V here and turn on texture, you'll see it's a bit darker, but you can see the texture on your model. I like Material Preview. It kind of gets to the lighting. It's a bit brighter. So I'm going to use Material Preview, but I just want to make sure you guys saw in a video that if you want, click on the white ball, go to V here, Studio, Texture, and that'll get you something that looks reasonably kind of, you know, you can at least see the distortion grid on it. So I'm going to go back to Material Preview myself. And now we've got a texture on here. Now, the pipes are pretty easy. The seams are pretty easy for the pipes, right? And remember, that's this big part of UVunwrapping. It's actually not really any different than the UVunwrapping we did on the ship body, right? You make your seams, you mark them, you select your edge loops, mark them as seams, and then you tell it to unwrap. So I'm going to go to, make sure the object's selected, go to 2 for edge mode. Now, like I said, if you want to, you can always kind of, you know, switch back to shaded. You technically turn back to material itself if you want to, right? And I'm just going to select edge loops, right? Double left click, shift double left click. I'll probably hide them more kind of against the body of the ship. So just double left click to select an edge loop. And then, of course, shift. Shift adds, right? It adds polygons, it adds vertices, edges, it adds edge loops, it adds objects. Shift is add selection, no matter what your selection is, including edge loops. You can select multiple edge loops, right? You can actually use Control, double left click to deselect an edge loop too. Kind of neat. So maybe I want to deselect that one and kind of maybe hide it a little more against the ship hull. But I'm just kind of putting one seam along these, right? And then, of course, I could right-click, because right-click always brings up our context menu, right? And in this case, it's edge, because we're in edge mode. 2 for edge mode, right? 2 for edge selection. And I'm going to go down towards the bottom, about 2/3 down, is something called mark seam. Now, right below that's clear seam. So if you accidentally added some edges that you marked, or you marked a seam that you don't want anymore, clear seam, right? How do you get rid of a seam? Clear it. In this case, we want to mark them. There we go. Now, I don't really need the other pipes. We're going to UV unwrap and mirror it over. Technically, that does sacrifice asymmetry, right? Our texture will be the same on both sides. If you're doing film stuff or even a more modern game, that's not necessarily something you want to do. But we're trying to be a little more efficient for you guys and take into consideration, you know, some of you guys are working on your school devices. So we're going to just make it a little easier on ourselves. Allow our textures to act bigger than they actually are. It'll be a little more resource friendly if you don't have the most powerful computer. But we do sacrifice asymmetry, right? But there's no real right or wrong. It's just you get more bang for buck out of your texture, but you also, it has to be the same on both sides. So no right or wrong. It's just kind of what you need. And for us, it's going to make a little more sense to just kind of have the UVs be on top of each other. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. I'm just going to select a couple of faces on the pipes. Because remember, if you select a face on each pipe, remember there is a tool in Blender called Select Linked. Blender's got great selection tools. Up there with the best selection tools I've used. Used to be a big Moto fan. Actually, still am a pretty big Moto fan. It's Blender's just as awesome now and, well, free. So, Select Linked. Normally it's right bracket when you use industry compatible, but I like spacebar, and I don't animate. I'm not an animator, so I just reassign that because I'm like, I don't animate, so I don't need spacebar for that. So I switched mine, but it is right bracket. But it is in the select menu, select linked, linked. And remember what it does is even though all these pipes are one object, which they are, right? See how all the pipes are one object? They don't touch each other. So remember, objects are a bit more nebulous in 3D than you think they are, right? It's really just a collection of polygons, and they can be directly merged or welded to each other or not. And select linked is great at allowing you to select just the directly connected polygons. And of course, we can hit delete, faces, and there we go. So now I'm going to go back to my workspaces up here, and I'm going to switch to the UV editing workspace, right? Right at the top are these little tabs. And one of those tabs is UV editing, right? And what this does is it switches us to our 3D view, but also our UV view. Because remember, UV unwrapping is the process of taking a 3-dimensional model and basically creating a 2-dimensional version of it that's stretched and flattened to be low distortion, right? Basically to be smooth and not have a lot of wrinkles, right? Because then your texture will look much nicer, and when you paint your texture, it'll look good on your model. I'm going to turn off the thruster visibility for a moment. Remember, there is the green triangle over here, and you can go to the UV map section there and double-click to name this, call it pipes. You don't necessarily have to. The UVs will kind of be unique to each object, but I like giving them names so that it's organized, and I can look and know that's the pipe UVs, right? So, usually good to name it just to have it organized. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to unwrap. Select all, right? And one of the things we noticed, if I turn Material Preview on, is that the UVs aren't the worst ever, but they're kind of stretched a lot, right? So you can see it's looking somewhat checkerboard because the UVs that the pipes created initially aren't the worst, but they're not really the best either, right? So what we need to do is we need to unwrap these and then straighten them up, right? So with all the faces selected, and that is in the select menu, select all, Control A. I can then go to the UV editing workspace menu here, UV menu, right? And you see there's a menu called UV in the UV editor. That's this viewport on the right side is your UV editor with your UV tools and your UV menus, right? Go to UV, unwrap, unwrap. And we saw this on our ship, right? The actual process of unwrapping in Blender is pretty much the same all the time. Select your edge loops, mark them as seams, then unwrap. And there we go. Now, right off the bat, you can see that this is pretty respectable. This is pretty good. You're looking at it, it's pretty checkerboard, right? So now we've got something pretty low distortion. Now, if you're just going to do kind of a more roughed out metal that doesn't have any repetitive geometric patterns, like say if we wanted a bunch of lines to go through your corrugation effect, or maybe like diamonds like a hose would have, right? A highly repetitive, highly geometric pattern that kind of tiles and repeats is not going to texture as well on this with these UVs this way. Like I said, if we're not doing that and it's just kind of a generic metal texture, this should be fine, right? But if you're trying to get a more clean, repetitive tiling, repeating texture on there that's highly geometric, we could do a little more to make these better, right? We want to straighten them up, right? And remember, I showed you the other day that if your sync selection's on, that can actually get in the way of your straighten working properly, right? So you have to be aware of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here now. I'm going to go to 2 for edge mode. And you see how it does change in the UV editor, right? It's unique in both views. See how face mode's still on in this view, the 3D view? But in the UV editor view, 2 is on for edge selection. You see there are actually selection buttons up here. But the quick keys still basically work the same. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just that object select in the UV editor is island select. It lets you select these different unwraps. So what I could do with 2 for edge mode on is I could double click on this bottom edge loop here. And it really shouldn't select the whole thing. So I'm just going to maybe select the whole loop down here. Remember, you do have select linked shortest path, so you can kind of select a path down here. And what I'm going to do with those selected is I can go into UV menu. And I'm trying to remember which of the straight ones it is. Is this that one? No, okay. So it's going to be the other one. So I can go to UV, align UV, and there's a straighten down here, right? And you'll notice what that does is that it actually kind of flattens and straightens this up down here. But you'll see there's options here for align. And you can do what's called transmission. What that does is that translates that straighten all the way up that pipe. Now, you might not be seeing those options there. That is because there is in Edit Preferences, Add-ons. I'm going to type in UV in the, UV, there we go. I'm going to type in UV in the little magnifying glass for the add-on search. You want to have Layout UV and Magic UV turned on. I believe Layout UV is already turned on by default. Magic UV I don't think is. But type in UV and make sure that you've got these on. You might not see text tools. That's an add-on that I have that's got some cool features in it. It's kind of a little bit broken in the 3 series though. And I don't want to have you guys worry about installing an add-on. But make sure to turn on Magic UV. So just, you know, go Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, type in UV in the magnifying glass, make sure Magic UV is on, and UV Layout if it isn't on, but I think that one should be on by default. And that's going to give you these extra options. But you see how this basically gives us the ability to come in here and I can grab this edge, select link shortest path, and then of course I can go to UV menu and you'll see now you'll have towards the bottom align UV, straighten. And you see how it straightens it. And then you just have it transmit all the way up. You see, you can kind of tell it to use different kind of options there, but transmission is going to be fine for us. And you see how it just straightens these up, right? You notice how the distortion's not radically changing because the default unwrap wasn't terribly distorted, but this is going to support a repetitive texturing with geometric patterns better. So keep that in mind if you're doing like hoses or pipes and you want like a diamond pattern to go cleanly on it. You probably need to do this straighten stuff. So I'll grab this edge, shift left click there. Select link shortest path, UV, align UV, straighten, tell transmission to be on. And basically we just kind of, grab these bottoms. Just grab that bottom edge loop. Do that select link shortest path. And you notice how I have to have a start and an end, so it does a path, right? And then of course UV, align UV, straighten, transmission, and there we go. And now these are in much better shape, right? I can always scale them up a little bit. Remember, 4 is island mode, right? Let's see, we've got them in a pretty good shape. If you really, really wanted to push even further as well to straighten these perfectly, right? You might even go as far as doing your shortest path. And then what you can actually do is in your line, particularly, or the line up here, you can actually specifically straighten it on a specific axis, right? So I could easily just straighten these ones to be on the oh, come on. Might try auto align. There we go. So you can try align auto, and that actually flattens it exactly perfectly. And then you can go in here to align, straighten, transmission, and this is going to get it for you perfect, right? So if you're kind of a little bit off, you might just go in there, do your shortest path, go to UV, and you could always use your different align features, right? Align auto. And of course we can go to align down here, straighten, tell it to transmit up. That'll just give you that extra little bit, right? Now mind you, if I go back to edit preferences and I turn UV magic off and I go into the UV menu here, you'll see that align auto is still there. We just don't have that straighten, right? So if I was to go back to edit preferences and I was to turn off text tools, you'll still see that the align auto's there. So that's actually kind of part of that default that comes with your UVunwrap, right? The UV layout. So you should have access to all those by default, particularly if you have UV magic on. And then of course we can always go back in here. In this case, I'm probably going to scale these up manually just to make sure they take up a little more space. You will notice, though, that this is going to actually have a lot of dead pixel space. So if you really wanted to have unique texturing on these, you could actually mirror it over, move those off. You could, of course, always widen these out as well. But that will start to create some stretching. So you have to kind of be careful with that stuff. Generally, though, if you could get as much pixels in there as you can, great. But you also don't want to change your texel density too much. All right. We kind of have gone long on this one, so I think that'll be good. And we'll do a little more UV unwrapping videos later on get one more third one in here just to kind of finish this up, and then kind of do the thrusters, a little more practice at that stuff. But the big thing is I really wanted to just get you guys to see turning on UV Magic, right? Add on that you have the Align Straighten feature, that you have Align Auto, and these can get you some cool, quick ways to kind of straighten up your UVs for you automatically. And it doesn't look like they're less distortion because they're really not. But like I said, this will support repetitive geometric pattern textures better when you paint them, right? Particularly if you're not going to do it procedurally, although even procedurally it'll support those better. This kind of straightened out UV layout works a lot better for highly repetitive geometric textures. It allows so that it repeats and they match up with the same excellent seam on the sides. So most of the time you don't have to worry about straightening for your stuff, but certain kinds of texture patterns, highly geometric, repetitive ones, it needs this. All right, I think we'll stop there. I think that'll be a good place for us to stop. We'll save over that one. All right, so I'll stop recording.